How's it going, everybody? Sorry. Okay, so I got a video. It's about ignorance. It's about, hopefully you can hear me. It's about how American ignorance, and this is for every American, even if it's what's it called, contextualized for one way or the other, is actually a message for every American. And so the idea is that every American, especially now the tensions are rather high and the racial tensions, here's one that I do want to say: two wrongs don't make a right. So for one, back in the day, from what I understand, whites dominated. Whites had this majority reign or dominance, and they expressed their sense of maybe not superiority. I mean, I guess during that time there also was a would you call it a preference for themselves in likeness, which is interesting because when at the time when people of color emerged on the scenes and gained their citizenship, they, to be freed men, and they want to join these mediums, they were regarded not only as inferior, but essentially they didn't qualify for the medium that they themselves made. And you can say it's superiority. It's definitely superiority, but I think it's also a missing the mark, so to speak. Now, when I say that, I like to try to explain, to me, a missing of the mark is that they. Oh, are you good? That they express preferential treatment, preferential disdain for anything that wasn't them. So this is, in a sense, you can call it discrimination. You could call this plenty of things, but in a sense, it was in its own right ignorance, and it's not really ignorance because it was ignorance. I'm sorry, I was thinking in a matter of not knowing any better. But ignorance is you intentionally ignoring someone who's in a state of ignorance. Someone who's ignorant. So, doing this, imagine these people. They had a state of ignorance. And these people create these mediums and now have to invite new people in who don't share their likeness, but share their skill. And they still put them under a standard. Now today, we cling to these legacies that aren't really like in terms of likeness important until it's changed. And we see changes from these movies. They're not just gender swapping, they're race swapping and stuff like that. And it's like, we say, we hear people try to justify their claim using science. We have people justifying their claim using science to say, hey, well, she's a fish. And this aerial change. And it's very telling, but also it just reveals the ignorance on one side and also the other side, because the likeness of a character matters. But at the same time, it's like now they know how it feels to have someone whose likeness actually matters. And if she were white, then that wouldn't have been an issue. It would just be like, get over it. How you doing? So it just makes me wonder, in terms of just our history, do we even consider this aspect of where we're at in terms of just understanding I guess maybe thinking that where are we at in terms of the historical narrative? Are we where we're supposed to be? Do we need to grow up? Do we need to progress and move forward? Now, here's what I say from both ignorance on both parts is that, and it's not just that, it's with anything that's in regards to a similar narrative. I think we both need to kind of see our part in it. Just like we say we're together, we're one, but there was preferential treatment, there was neglect, there was essential lack of prioritizing, there was using, there was abusing, and there's just denial of all that actually happening to a set of people. And then another side is where we're picking and choosing and we're changing icons, instead of just banding together and just continuously fighting for our spot. Not so much with them, but just our spot for ourselves. And so I think there's just been plenty of ignorance on both sides, And then you see poverty, but even so, let's just say that, even so, in poverty, there's still greatness made from that, and which is kind of ironic because they say that some person that in poverty, blacks seem to be kind of uncivilized, but trap music and drill music was made, and people love that. So it shows that uncivility does not breed solely destruction. It breeds creativity. And it's been proven even in movies that after a certain cap of finances, it kind of tanks. So it's like when you don't have as much funds, you don't have as much equipment, and therefore you have to think. You have to start being ingenious in your thoughts. In your ways of presenting your film. So it's like it's interesting, like how there's plenty of beauty in not so much poverty, but despite poverty. And so I consider that in my mind. Just because black people aren't really innocent and white people aren't innocent either. Not even if there are descendants. We're just not. We're just like we are the pain of our forefathers. We are the leftovers of unfinished grief. And either side didn't even say sorry. And by either side, I want to also say even the kings who sold us over, and even the ones who kidnapped us, and also those who actually went overboard because they would rather die than be a slave. Black people are survivors of ancestral pain, ancestral kidnapping, and I want to even say natives, because it's like none of us are the same, and it's just like because of this deep-rooted pain, we're now, especially in poverty, there's not really any outlet to express that pain. It's just like you're in poverty, but the people outside of your place, people outside of your impoverished place, and even other cultures don't express concern but say it's your fault. There's just plenty, like if you check poverty just has these notions that keeps you locked down. They just do. They don't have any it's like if somebody does emerge from poverty, rises from poverty, it's like a rarity, because these systems, and I know people don't like it when you say that, systems, but it's like if a system is designed, even incidentally, accidentally, whatever, designed to make you feel like hopeless, why emerge from it? Just saying, why? And so And if there are those who haven't lived under oppression or under a majority, like let's say there's people who've lived, and there's been people who are white South Africans who've been feeling the burden of their government, who are unlike them, retaliating against them post-apartheid, and they're grieving them. Now they want to get away. Has one, I guess I've mentioned this before. It was a YouTuber, who's a South African, white South African, and he moved away and he got a better prospects of life. That's great for him. But the idea is similar to us being oppressed by a majority. Now back in the day, it was the opposite. How did a small percentage become oppressed by a minority? I like to think it was just one person knew how to manipulate the other. And it's not like these people are dumb, but at the same time, it's like, if you know how to do it, and you want to put yourself over somebody else, and if you're selfish enough, why not do it? But a lot of this is speculation. It's just kind of like understanding the idea, the mindset. And I guess for me, in terms of South Africa, I'm not one to actually speak on behalf of that because I didn't grow up in South Africa during apartheid. I remember an interview with Trevor Noah in the Breakfast Club, and he just spoke about very important themes. It was very important. It was very interesting. I was glad to hear it. But I think even now it's just it's going to need some humility, maybe perhaps on both sides to make some progression. That's what I believe. Instead of saying, shying away from these topics because it's uncomfortable or it sounds like nonsense, but it's like, also it reminded me of this lady I got a reference to. She had this idea about multicultural counseling and how understanding people's cultures are different from yours. So it's good to just try to understand that and not to enforce your biases on them. And so it's just understanding people live different from you. It'd be ignorant and arrogant to assume otherwise, that people live all the same like you and you should just do what they did. But my point is that I think everybody has a bit of ignorance that they need to move past. And regardless if it's just the figurehead scapegoat that's this Ariel movie, I believe this movie is just like a catalyst for rage, for change. I believe whites are not used to change. They've been so used to seeing themselves on the TV screen. And you can say it's just a matter of iconography. Just, she used to be white, so now keep her white. And it's that definitely could be the case. But why is changing the color a big deal? If it was just like something small, then it would have been well, that sucks. Well, I guess that's just how it is, And they say, well, what if we did it to you? But it's just again, two wrongs don't make a right. So I just think that's just silly. If again, and that's the problem. That's not really just sorry. That's not really just our problem. That's film directors' problem. It's always really been film directors' problem because they do miscast. Maybe they do it again. They've done this with plenty of other people. And they said, well, we didn't really think about the race. Maybe they're thinking colorblind, but and also just consider that if they for this movie, even if it's in The Likeness Matters, what happens if she discriminates? What happens if he or she, the film director, discriminates and say, we only want white people, we only want black people? Especially given the climate today, if they say they only want white people, how does that sound? That sounds racist. Now, if you say they only want black people, even though it doesn't make, in terms of the phenotype, the visual aspect, it doesn't make sense. It makes sense in terms of the culture. So, am I justifying? Sort of, but not really. Here's why I don't think so. It's because even though this is the way it is, it doesn't mean that the likeness doesn't matter. I really hope that people can understand on both sides that likeness matters. Likeness matters. Likeness matters. Because if it doesn't, why cast anybody anything? You might as well just get that, have that similar Cinderella story with Brandy and the other guy who was white and the other woman who was she white and the princess was black and the prince was Asian. It was just like a whole goulash of stuff. But let's just suspend our disbelief, even though it'd be hard to do with that. Because we all know that from our understanding of like general biology, you know, which is kind of weird because it's like we're just now getting into it. Even though back in the day it was just like some weird choices, you know, like I don't know. It's just like the common family was, you know, if you see a commercial, it was never really like white woman, black guy. Like it was just white family. White family producing white family. White family producing black family. Black, you know. And then it was funny because at a Super Bowl they had a white woman and a black man and they had a mixed child and people lost their minds. It was just kind of crazy. Like, why is that? I thought we were post-racial in this world. Why is that an issue? So, I don't think we ever really got through the trauma. I don't think. Sorry. I don't think. I don't think either side has actually grasped what their culture actually is. I think we're trying to battle over this super culture as if it actually exists, as if it's successfully working, and that we're just trying to get our part in, get our you know, battle over it. When the actuality is that no, we're not even like together to even think or consider such a thing, form such a thing as a super culture. What we actually need is to figure out our own culture. You know, first, before we become a nation of cultures known as the United States of America, we probably have to start thinking to ourselves and say, who am I? And especially, where does my culture come from? And for blacks, I think maybe we need to understand who we are as African Americans. It's both. Not so much as one or the other, but just who are we in both sense? Are we African Americans? What does that mean? Does that mean we can live both as Americans and Africans? What does that mean to be an African in slavery, post-slavery America? You know, what does that mean? You know, because if our brothers from Africa, Nigerian, Ugandan, Congo, and if that's the one, South African, Nigerian? I don't know if I said that already. Egyptian. You know, if these members start coming in and they say, hey, well, I got kids, so they're technically African American. Well, technically they'd be right, but at the same time, that's reserved kind of for us, even though technically they'd be right because they're in America. Oh, how you doing? And so, given the idea, it makes me wonder, who are we as African Americans? Who are we? Are we, I mean, because it's like hip-hop came from a place of oppression, you know, from what I understand, after like, I think it was like DJ Kool Herc. And then now everybody loves hip-hop because it's a creative medium, you know. So people who said we were inferior, we made a creative medium that everybody likes now. How inferior is that? It's not. It's a matter of skill. And you have people who love this style of jazz that I feel like is just like, I want to say is it appropriated? I don't know. I really don't know. Is it majority understood by blacks? Is it well known to be by blacks? I think so. I want to say that more. So if it is by blacks, or if it is majority known by blacks, even though there's white fellas in jazz, you know, like for instance, I believe it's Giant Steps by Coltrane. You know, that's like a staple for jazz players. Or at least I think it's a staple, and it's like one of those like proving grounds. But like that takes skill. It takes skill to learn stuff like that, you know. So it's like all this stuff that proves that black people don't have inferiority, and they shouldn't, and nor should they believe that they're under white people's thumb. Like, just like, I don't know what it's gonna take. Maybe it's gonna take us to try to build our resources and try to figure out, like, where do you fit? How do you get somewhere? You know, what's your strengths? You know, I don't know. First of all, even if it is legislatively true or culturally true, socially true, I think mentally we have to abandon this idea, like, that someone's under us. Like, you know, and I'm not saying oppression don't happen, like police brutality don't happen, police bullying don't happen, because it does. It happens a lot, sadly. And these people are supposed to be like our protectors and service, but it's like some of them are actually tripping. Some of them are actually they do wrong things, they mishandle people, they hurt people, they just bully people, and that's not okay. But one thing I do want black people to understand, and even white people who need to understand and stop being so fragile under black success, you know, and stop kind of generalizing the idea that, like, because it's inappropriate to generalize people's culture who make light of success, to say that's everybody. That's inappropriate. What's it? Because if you have to make a success, it actually means something. To say, well, that's just people, you know, it's like, no, it's African American people. They need to hear that they are successful. They need to hear that great things can happen to them. It's a motivator. It's a morale booster. They need to say, hey, great job, you know, instead of saying that happens to everybody. You know, they're not tripping. They're recovering from historical generational violence. And so no one can force you to do anything you don't want to do. So I was stretching my neck out. No one can force you to do anything you don't want to do. But it's like, it'd be helpful to just support the people who are doing good. And same here with other white people. Like, for instance, Gary Owen. You know, it's just this moniker, like, you know, there are certain people who black society loves, and therefore we say they're invited to the cookout. I like to believe people believe that Gary Owen, he's a comedian, he's a white comedian, but he's invited to the cookout. Why? Because he's funny, because his skill is good. It made me think of Barry Spears, where he spoke about what people they was trying to be offended, and they told him a joke, and he said, no, I found it funny. And that's a good portion of what these people, what defines appropriation, what defines appreciation is skill. I think that's what is going to count. If it's in poor taste and it's bad usage of whatever medium that it is, then it's poor use. You know, it's not really like an appreciation, because it's not good. It's not even itself. You know, there's these bands, Moonchild and Haters Coyote, funky bands, and also the Average White Band, funky bands, but very good. And some people are so upset, and they're kind of like gatekeeping the culture. They're saying, like, no, we don't want these white people here. And it's just like, they're good. And it shows, like, even with Moonchild, they said that even people like Jill Scott has, you know, she's a woman from the artist from the genre of soul. Express appreciation, express, like, wow and all, you know. So it's like, again, it's skill. If you could do this stuff well, then it's great. You show appreciation for the culture. But it's like, and people say, man, this PC culture, it's like, it's not really about being PC or not. It's about being appreciative, and also being, like, considerate what you say. You can't just say stuff off the hip anymore. You can't just say reckless things anymore. You got to be more considerate. Back in the day, it was a majority culture that was white run, so they could say anything they wanted. They were saying anything they wanted. They were making fun of anybody. They were making fun of the Chinese, even though they, from what I can understand, Japanese. Like, if you watch one of the propaganda videos of Disney with Donald Duck, he was trying to be a Hitler soldier. I mean, a Nazi soldier in Germany, and he was, I believe, he was with Hirohito. He was a Japanese person. I believe they were in ties to get together. I can't remember why. I'm not really a fan of, not really like delved into, sorry, one sec, into society, into American society. But what my point is that they made fun of these places, and I've heard from somebody, they say it's a morale booster. It's to let us know, like, no, we're not going to be bullied and stuff like that, or just like boost their morale. I know how that works. To me, that's propaganda. But that's how propaganda works. It boosts the country's morale. It tells exaggerated and exacerbated tales to boost morale of one's country, or to do the opposite for another country. And it's like, I understand how that works. It's not bad. It's just honestly dishonest. But that's just how propaganda works. But my point is that America at the time was at a space where making fun of people that's just how we boosted our morale. Wasn't right. Let's just say it wasn't right. But that's how war is. War is cruel and war isn't right. It's just about doing the necessary things, boosting your morale and taking out your enemies. Because the emotions matter. But and even back then, it was like, if you really think about this, if you think about how these things were happening and why they happened, it's not really just a matter of racism and preferentialism. It's more of a greed persona, a greed perspective, more greed. So consider this: why did blacks have these ideas that they were watermelon, chicken eating, and especially from like Birth of a Nation? Like they just like these ideas. They like these specific foods. Why? Because when blacks became free, they became they were their own people, not blacks but whites, own people propagandized them to have a distrust of black people selling watermelon and things of that nature. It was propaganda. That's all it was. It was propaganda for the sake of greed. We don't want them coming in on muscling on our business, so we're gonna make up some stuff so that people don't buy from them. Not right, but that's how it is. And it's not like I'm saying that now. How you doing? Doing good. But that's how it was back in the day. And so, given that, if we understand how the history works, and I think that's just what it's going to take. Now, I had this idea about history, about why slavery wasn't free during the time of the colonies formation, and even during the Declaration of Independence. Why wasn't it a high priority? Well, how you doing? The idea was that. How you doing?